Hello, Unravelers. Welcome back to Tiff Unraveled. If you're new here, then welcome. I'm Tiff. I'm so happy to have you. Right now, we are following the Brendan Banfield trial. This is the au pair affair trial. If you haven't heard about it, I'm sure most of you have if you're here. If you haven't, you want to catch up, you can go back and watch my first two videos on the case. I'm just kind of doing my best to sum up what I'm seeing. All right, so I know last time we talked, I said a thing that I may not have followed through on. I said this thing. I said, I promise I'll make it work. I didn't lie. I just said a thing that turned out not to be true, but not for lack of trying. I'm sorry that I took my little hiatus. I really did try my best to listen, and I was listening. It's just that I do this while I'm at work, and sometimes it just doesn't always work out that I can follow the entire day. I just don't have that type of job. I wish I did. Life and work was just kind of like, plot twist, surprise. And I was just kind of like, you know what? Actually, no thanks. But, as always, you just kind of end up having to roll with those punches. But I'm here now. We do have some stuff to talk about. We have some things to cover. I'm super interested on everyone's take on what they've seen, on what they've watched, about what we'll cover today. So today we are recapping days 5, 6, and 7 of the Brendan Banfield trial, where I left off last week. No one in that courtroom or in that gallery or anyone watching the trial has had a single unbothered thought in like 4 days. Okay? There's a lot to say, in my opinion. Anyway, before we dive in, here's a very standard disclaimer, because I don't like being yelled at on the internet. I'm not a lawyer. I am not a legal expert in any way, shape, or form. I'm just chatting with my unravelers about what I saw and what I think, and getting your thoughts on it as well. Don't come for me. Anyway, and of course, everyone, even Brendan Banfield, is innocent until proven guilty. I'm just here to cover what happened, track what's being presented as best I can, and talk with you about it, my unravelers. Anyway, so here's what we're covering. Day 5 is when the defense starts their case. Okay, and they don't tiptoe in. They do what every defense does before they present. They, present their motion to dismiss, and there was a whole lot of like, this case shouldn't even exist type of energy coming from Mr. John Carroll. Yeah, they all do that. Okay. Day 6 continues with more witnesses, of course, but it gets interesting because it starts to show maybe a little bit of internal dynamics, some potential supervisory pressure, maybe starts to peek out. I won't completely say that I didn't get that vibe, and then day 7, which was yesterday. Oh my God. Huge moment, though. Yesterday, we learned Brendan Banfield is going to testify. He's going to testify. Plus, we got a million digital forensics timelines. I think we got was there body cam footage in the start? I can't remember. We'll go through it because I have my notes. And then we have a judge who is at the start very politely, but very clearly like over it at this point. She's over it. Anyway, and just so you know, these days were dry, okay? Like shockingly dry at times, okay? There's a lot of repetitive questioning from Mr. Carroll, which has me literally pulling my hair out strand by strand sometimes, okay? Just because that's less painful than listening to what's happening in this courtroom at certain points. There's just so much circling back. There's a lot of like, if I ask it again in a different way, surely the witness will magically answer in a different way. Spoiler alert, they don't. Before I start, I just want to ask you guys, like when you are watching the trial, what keeps you more engaged? Is it like emotional human testimony, or is it like the technical stuff, like the digital evidence, the timelines, the forensics? What do you guys like to see? Like what helps you get through these trials and form your opinion more? Anyway, okay. With all that being said, let's unravel. So day 5 is the first day that the defense gets to put on their case. And they, of course, start with a motion to dismiss. John Carroll said that his reason for this motion, by the way, again, I'm sure you guys know this, they all do this, right? But his reason for this motion was that he claimed that the Commonwealth knowingly used false testimony. They said that the Commonwealth attorneys knew that the evidence didn't support the catfishing theory, but that they proceeded anyway. Okay. And of course, Judge Penny, as most judges do, I've never seen this work, but she said, of course, denied. Move on, right? She said, this is about the weight of the co-defendant, Juliana's testimony. And as far as that's concerned, that's for the jury to decide. Do they believe Juliana? Do they not? Judge Penny was basically saying in response to this, you don't get to end the case on this argument. This is a fight of credibility, and credibility fights are for the jury to decide. Okay? They get to decide who they believe and who they don't believe. It doesn't mean that the defense can't argue that the Commonwealth leaned in too hard on an unfounded or unsubstantiated theory, right? They can try to argue that, but the judge definitely is not going to treat this case like it contains that kind of misconduct that like will just legally destroy a prosecution. Anyway, but I feel like right here is where we start to see like the defense's rhythm that made me want to just dissociate throughout the trial days this week. Again, just repeating the same theory over and over and over and hoping that it morphs into a different result. Like, sir, the witness answered. You asking it again doesn't change physics, right? So anyway, after the motion to dismiss was denied, the defense proceeds to enter in about 70 exhibits, most of which were letters that Juliana had written to Brendan when she was in jail. Again, these letters were very intense, very emotional, showing Juliana's start with her extreme devotion to Brendan, a lot of emotional attachment. We touched on the letters, but he was just entering those letters into evidence. There was no testimony tied to these. He was just entering what he had that the prosecution didn't have into evidence. Okay. All right. So Mr. John Carroll starts the day by calling back to the stand Officer Beckner. Okay. He was one of the first officers on the scene. We heard from him when prosecution was presenting their case as well. His body cam footage was played again, but not only up through what prosecution played, but then they continued it through him escorting Brendan to the ambulance, him riding with Brendan in the ambulance to the hospital. You do hear on this body cam, now I'm in healthcare. Look, I've never had to give like death notifications. That's not part of my job. I work in internal medicine, like do physicals, right? Or like chronic care management, right? We do hear on the body cam, and this is not part of the case. It was just something I picked up. Like I don't know if it was a nurse. I don't know if it was a doctor, a physician. I'm not sure. But like the delivery of like the notification that Christine had passed was just like, yeah, so your wife died. I was like, oh, okay. The bluntness of it all, it was crazy. But you do hear them walking through, the next steps. What do we do now? What is, all of that, right? Anyway, we hear Brendan get really emotional, crying. We hear the chaplain come in. We hear them praying. I mean, that was the extent of it. I don't know what was defense playing this just like to hear the emotion that was being emitted from Brendan, like his crying, his sobbing. He was asking about his daughter in the ambulance ride. He was asking, is she going to make it? Is she going to make it? Not the daughter, Christine. So I'm not sure why they felt the need to play, I guess just to show that he was like worried about Christine and worried about his daughter and, all of that stuff. I don't know. Anyway. And then of course we did hear like a hand washing incident occur on the body cam footage as well. Prosecution didn't play that part. Defense did. So it was after the death notification. You hear Brendan like sobbing. And I guess Beckner said he was like rubbing his hands on his face and he allowed Brendan to wash his hands. I know. We shouldn't have done that. I said that last time. We shouldn't have done that. But anyway, what's done is done, I guess. So yeah, again, I think Beckner is like, I think John Carroll wanted Officer Beckner to like get on the stand and give like a snapshot of Brendan's early behavior and statements, because I think jurors maybe believe that those uncurated, unfiltered statements, right, are a little bit more raw and believable, but are they? Anyway, and of course, the hand washing moment always is going to raise eyebrows because of evidence preservation. And maybe it goes to show, because John Carroll is trying, his defense in part is that the investigation was mishandled. And maybe this was just his way of showing, like, the scene wasn't treated forensically at that moment at the hospital, and the scene being like Brendan, the evidence that was allowed to just be like washed down the drain. Okay. The next up was Officer, I think, Balmer. They played his body cam footage. Remember, we haven't seen anything. This is not a visual trial at all. There's nothing. Lack of visual aid is screaming at my ADD. I'm like, can I see something? I feel like this whole trial there's been no visuals. Anyway, not my business. But Officer Balmer's body cam footage showed, I guess, the position of where Brendan was when he arrived at the scene. He was next to Christine, but on cross-examination, the Commonwealth asked Officer Balmer, like, was he using the towel? Was he using the bed sheets? Was he using the bedding, the linen, all of that stuff? And Officer Balmer was like, no, he wasn't using any of that to try to, stop the bleeding or whatever. He was kneeling there and he had his hands on Christine's neck, but he wasn't trying to use any of the things around him to, apply pressure or stop the bleeding. Not everyone is medically. I mean, maybe you would think, but maybe I don't know if I would say that putting your hands there to also apply pressure wouldn't be maybe an instinct. Okay. Anyway, but it definitely becomes like a battleground of interpretation here, I think. So Commonwealth wants the jurors to think, obviously, if you're trying to save her, why aren't you doing the obvious life-saving things, right? And the defense wants jurors to think yeah, because it was a traumatic situation and he had just walked into this thing happening and he froze and he panicked and he dissociated or whatever. Not everyone becomes, a medic, in their own kitchen or whatever. But anyway, then we get to the defense's blood spatter expert. Her name is Leanne. I don't have my glasses. Singler. She is a blood spatter analyst. She's got 39 years of experience. She was qualified as an expert without objection. All good, all great, fine. She testified about Joseph Ryan's injuries as well, including the puncture wound on his left thumb, which the other blood spatter analyst said didn't really look like a typical knife wound when, we talked about that. But this one says that it could be categorized as, a wound that he sustained, while he was doing that thing. Defense did try to get her to classify bloodstains on Joseph Ryan's forearms as well, although her opinion did differ from the other one, right? She was saying, well, I don't really know how she got to that conclusion because, the target surface was Joseph Ryan's hairy arm, and the hair on the arm, changes and distorts things. And she just didn't feel like the other analyst or expert would have had enough information to make the classification that she did, which was the drip stains on Joseph Ryan's arms, right? She wouldn't have had enough information to determine the mechanism, all of this stuff. She basically was countering the fact that the other analyst came to such a hard conclusion. She's like, that there just wasn't enough data and information to classify these stains, patterns, the blood stuff. Okay. Then the defense was like, oh my God. It was so clunky. And just even the analyst was like, what? He starts asking her about scooping blood, and she's like, scooping blood? And he's like, yeah, scooping blood. He says it 5 times, and she's like, okay, I mean, it would be incredibly difficult to contain blood, in your hands and transfer it without it seeping out, if that's what you're asking. Anyway, it was just it was a moment where I was just like, okay. So the defense here, I feel was just trying to open doors, alternate explanations, ambiguity, mechanisms that could support doubt. It just didn't end up giving that. It just kind of gave because on cross, Prosecutor Sands was like, well, is what the other blood evidence expert testified to, is that impossible? And she did try for a second. She was just kind of like, I just can't come to that same definitive conclusion because there's not enough data. And Jenna Sands was like, yeah, okay. But is what she said impossible? Or is it possible that that is also true? And she was just like, okay, yeah, I mean, it's possible. Anyway, so, an hour of testimony that ended up being like, okay, both things are possible, I guess. Both things are possible. And then Detective Brendan Miller got on the stand, right? This is the digital forensics examiner, the lead digital forensics examiner that was ultimately, after working on this case, transferred to the child exploitation unit about a year ago. Defense walked through all of this digital evidence with him, all the zeros and all the ones. So Miller testified that in the executive summary that he wrote, which he wrote before Juliana's confession, concluded that based on the digital evidence and facts known at the time, that it indicated that the device owner was responsible for the activity. But of course, on Commonwealth's cross, Jenna Sands was like, can you say Christine did this? Christine did that. And Detective Miller was like, I can never conclusively say, unless I'm witnessing it or it's caught on like video, I cannot conclusively say who was actually behind the screen operating the devices. Okay. He testified to the fact that his transfer was related to the work on the Banfield case. He said that he was asked to review his executive summary in light of the proffer, which was the confession made by Juliana with the deal, like, the deal with the prosecution or whatever. So in light of that new information, he was asked to review his summary, but that his summary remained the same because the digital data itself doesn't change. Okay, anyway, defense, oh my God, they just dragged it on and on, went on and on and on. Defense was like, but it was Christine's stuff, right? That doesn't change. He's like, yes, that doesn't change. My extraction of the data, my analysis of where the data came from and stuff, that's all the same. No, that's not going to change. Context changed. Juliana confessed to this thing, so I can't say who was operating the devices. Okay, so in a neat little ball, devices can show activity, they can't show identity, right? The defense wants jurors to hear like, well, Christine's devices were active, therefore Christine was the one doing this. Commonwealth wants jurors to hear, yeah, Christine's devices were active, but that does not prove in any way, shape, or form that Christine was the operator of those devices. The transfer being related to my work is exactly the line that defense wants the jurors to hear as well, because his whole thing is saying, well, look, his executive summary says Christine did this thing. And, the investigators and supervisors didn't like that he wouldn't change it, which he admitted to not changing it. And so they didn't like that he wouldn't agree with them. And so they kicked him out, right? Day 5 is really, when John Carroll starts to get up there and present his case, this is really where you start to just, John, please take a seat. Please have a seat or something. Go eat a Snickers bar. Take a break. Recalibrate. Do something. He continues to re-ask the same questions, hoping to get a different result, a different answer, a different, he keeps re-asking, hoping that they're going to say what he wants to hear and have this big aha moment. Bro, they're not changing what they're saying, no matter how many times you ask them the same question in different ways. Sit down. He's trying to get them to say things, to phrase things in a way that he can use, right? And the witnesses keep being like, no, bro, same answer. Okay? Move on. What do you think the jurors are thinking? I can't even imagine. Anyway, whatever. Next, Harry Lidsky, right? He's a private investigator in digital forensics. He's qualified as an expert. He did some federal law enforcement, DEA, DOJ, that kind of stuff, okay? Probably knows his stuff. He started by getting up there and saying, I don't look at anyone else's work before I review all the information on my own. I only use their conclusions to corroborate or, whatever. I form my own opinions and then I'll read. Right. They're talking about Brendan Miller's executive summary. Okay. He said, digital forensics is supportive evidence. It can point you in the right direction, but you always need corroboration, like surveillance or credit card transactions or other stuff, right? It says you can never rely on like a single artifact. You have to have context before and after. Okay. That's the first time we hear from Detective Linsky. It won't be the last, okay? It won't be the last. But we're moving on. So day 5 overall vibe was long, dry, repetitive, irritating. Was the information presented useless? I don't know. What do you guys think? I don't know. I don't really know what they proved. There was no like aha moments for me anyway. Maybe I missed something. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. But let's move on. It's time for day 6. Day 6 continues with defense witnesses. And this is the day where internal police dynamics become like a bigger theme for the defense. First up was Officer Robert Casanova. Cool name. All right. His body camera footage was played without audio for everyone in the courtroom, but also without video for everyone in the gallery or us as, onlookers. So we just sat in silence and watched people watch a silent video that we couldn't see. That was fun. From context, right? From what I gathered when John Carroll would stop the video and ask the officer a question, it looked like it was just video of him arriving to the scene. He said he never went into the house. He was tending to Juliana outside the home in the police cruiser. He wasn't sure which one. And then he started his duties for traffic control and controlling like access to the scene. The defense played about 25 minutes of this silent movie we couldn't see. So silence, in other words. I don't know what the relevance was. I don't know. Let me know if you know. I'm missing it, and I'm might be an idiot, but I don't know what the relevance was. I don't know what the point was. But to me, it just seemed like time filling. It was just something, I don't know. Let me know if I'm dumb. I'm fine with that. I'll take it. Okay. Next up came Sergeant Brian Ames. Sergeant Brian Ames was a supervisor in like this digital forensics unit. And he said only for about 4 months. The defense pulls up. We can't see anything again, but defense pulls up and shows him emails that he forwarded, one of which was Brendan Miller's executive summary that we talked about, and that he had forwarded those emails to 2 detectives, and then the proffer that was forwarded to detectives and supervisors with a timeline email to command staff. Sergeant Ames testified. I mean, I wasn't an investigator on this case. I was just forwarding the information to my command staff. He's like, I'm not trained in digital forensics. It's not my specialty. Ames basically just in his testimony sort of repeatedly framed this as normal information sharing. They're like, well, but you didn't share it with the prosecutors. He was like, well, I shared it with like my supervisors. My supervisors are the ones who share it with prosecutors, whatever. I don't know. John Carroll spent way too long asking him the same questions over and over again as well, getting the same answers. That is a theme. That's a theme in this trial. Anyway, on cross-examination, Jenna Sands very simply, easily gets up and confirms with Sergeant Ames that he wasn't involved with any of the digital forensics investigations. He wasn't involved in Brendan Miller's transfer. He didn't change, hide, distort he didn't do anything with the evidence. I guess defense thinks that that calling this man would go to show like some behind the scenes pressure without having any smoking guns, right? They want jurors thinking like something weird is going on behind the scenes here, but Ames is basically saying on the stand like, bro, I forwarded the emails. Like, that's it. And again, this is where my frustration with John Carroll continues to grow. The style that he has is it's a pattern. He's asking a question of a witness, hoping that the witness will say it in a way that sounds suspicious, and when it doesn't, when the witness says this is normal stuff that happens all the time, He'll ask it in a different way, trying to confuse them and get them to say their answer in a different way, hoping it will turn into some sort of like conspiracy confession. Sir, we're not summoning Beetlejuice. We don't need to say things 3 times or more, okay? Anyway, then we get to do Detective Leah Smith. I liked her. I thought that her testimony actually mattered. This is defense's witness, by the way. And I found her testimony significant and not in the way I think John Carroll thought it was going to be significant. Leah Smith got on the stand. She says, I am a homicide detective, okay? My job is to gather facts, gather evidence, gather information. You don't start with theories. You keep an open mind as you're gathering all of this stuff, right? She's like, theories aren't for me, okay? Theories are for the Commonwealth attorneys to present in court. I just am a truth seeker and a facts gatherer, okay? Detectives do these things so that they can get probable cause for warrants. She testified that she had absolutely no theory until the evidence was in the room with her. Okay. And a full understanding of that didn't come until towards the end of the investigation. So defense asks Detective Smith whether her supervisors suggested theories to the homicide investigators. Because remember, his whole defense is that this investigation was tunnel vision, confirmation bias. They pushed this theory. They got rid of people who didn't want to deal with it. They wanted Brennan, and they were going to make that shit fit, right? Detective Smith testified that, yes, within the first week or so of the investigation, there was a briefing where a certain lieutenant told investigators, there are 2 theories in this case. You need to get behind the right one. I mean, look, I don't like that because it sounds weird, like, get behind the right one. Like, what's the right one? And when asked by John Carroll, like, so was that the catfishing theory? She said it wasn't really made known what the theories were, just that there were 2 theories. They needed to get behind the right one. Okay. Smith testified that when that statement was made in that briefing, that she pushed back on that and said, hey, we're at the beginning of the investigation. Like, there should be no theories because we're still gathering facts. And she said to that, she got no response. She said that regardless of what was said in that briefing, her job is always done the same way. That her and her fellow investigators are going to do their job with an open mind, even if that's not what supervisors were telling them to do. That's how they do their job. She said, John Carroll kept saying, like, so is that when the catfishing theory went away? Is that when it went away? Even Jenna Sands was like, objection. What is went away? Stop saying went away, right? Like, anyway, judge finally concedes. Let's Detective Smith finish her answer. And she says catfishing theory never went away. It was always on the table. It was always something that we were investigating as evidence started to come out. And then, of course, on cross, Jenna Sands got her to confirm that she followed evidence. Theories did not drive how her or her colleagues handled the investigation. And Prosecutor Sands says, what was the turning point for charging Brendan Banfield? And Detective Smith says, when we got the blood evidence, not solely based on Juliana's testimony. She said, when that blood evidence came back, that's when we moved forward with the prosecution of Brendan Banfield. On redirect, John Carroll gets up and was like, so you felt pressure from these supervisors. That's why you pursued this catfishing theory. She said, no. No, I already told you. I didn't feel pressure. I followed the evidence and we had a confession. That's it. Anyway, so that was that for Detective Smith. I feel like Detective Smith is extremely credible, especially in the eyes of the jurors. Okay. And I feel like it's significant, right? Because this is a relatable thing, right? Supervisors pushing for things and you having the courage to stand up and say, so even if the pushing was true, jurors are now hearing the investigator, not the supervisors who had nothing to do with the investigation, but the actual investigators, the homicide detectives, saying, okay, cool story, bro, but I'm still going to do my job. I'm going to gather facts, gather evidence, gather information, and I will, at that point, the evidence is what tells the story. That's when we decide what happened here, okay? But I think the thing that did help the defense slightly was it does support the defense's pressure existed angle at the same time, because Detective Smith did say, yes, they said this in that way, right? Saying there are two theories here and you need to get behind the right one does sound a little slimy to me. I mean, I'm not, I will admit, just as a human, I'm just like, oh, I don't like the way you said that, but I'm okay. So maybe the jurors picked up on that as well. And we're just kind of like, well, why'd they say that? Anyway, that's just my thoughts. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think about that whole thing. Like, do you think that as a juror, jury brain, do you think that as a juror, you would care more about whether the pressure existed, right? Like the defense may have hit on that point, or about whether that pressure actually impacted or changed the way the investigation was handled, which according to Detective Smith, it did not. So next up on day 6, there's a lot of individual witnesses on day 6. We're going to try to get through them. I'll try not to linger. Okay. So next up on day 6 was Officer Nielsen. Again, right away, you can see what defense is trying to do here, or what I thought defense was trying to do here. Our opinions may differ, but they wanted to use Nielsen to paint this picture of the department being manipulative and coercive, right? They put pressure on this girl. They charged this poor girl, Juliana, with murder just to scare her into lying about Brendan, right? Very dramatic, very like cops twirling their little mustaches, right? Yeah. But actually, Nielsen, defense's witness, very calmly explained that this is actually standard law enforcement practice. When you have 2 suspects and you need one to cooperate, self-interest is a powerful tool, right? You charge them both, you offer a deal to whichever one you feel like is probably more willing to tell the truth, and that's not manipulation or slimy in any way. It's just basic prosecution or investigative strategy. And it happens in cases all the time, all across the country, all the days. Again, defense is conveniently ignoring, and I mean, by conveniently, I mean aggressively ignoring. If Juliana was making up a story to get a deal, like making it up, right? Or regurgitating this narrative that she learned from discovery from her attorney. Why is there so much evidence corroborating what she's saying? The soundproof windows, the FetLife account activity patterns, the timeline, the blood evidence. A lot of it is lining up to what Juliana said. And if she's lying, she's super lucky because her lies are aligning with all of this, physical and digital and forensic evidence outside of her statements. And I mean, uh, although I will concede to the fact that I think what defense is saying, because at first I was like, so is defense saying she's just making this up? That's quite a story. I think now, after watching more of this trial, what defense is actually saying is that Juliana, again, like I just said, is regurgitating a narrative presented to her by law enforcement. But I feel like even if law enforcement planted this seed, I don't think that they fed her every detail and like how well, I don't think that happened anyway. That's just my personal opinion, but I'm saying, how does defense expect us to believe that, like, where did this happen? We would have seen this in an interview for like, okay, this is what you're going to say. Blah, 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 right? Though I guess they were saying that her attorney fed her this information after, discovery of evidence was shared. But again, I just find it highly unlikely that that's the case. But again, that is only my opinion here. So I really don't think that Nielsen's testimony helped the defense at all. It just explained something that's very standard in police work. He said it very calmly, very clearly, and without any drama. Okay. So next up on the stand was former Deputy Chief Patrick Bruce, I think is how you say his name. And all right, things do get a little weird when Bruce is on the stand. So we do learn that he also has a master's degree in forensics, computer forensics. He was Detective Miller's direct supervisor. He was the one who reviewed Brendan Miller's digital forensic analysis, right? That executive summary that we've heard about. And Bruce testified on the stand that Miller's analysis contained what he called unsubstantiated deductions, and that, he was attributing evidence to Christine rather than contributing the evidence to Christine's device, which would be more accurate because even as Miller testified, you can't definitively put someone behind the screen if you're not like directly looking at them behind the screen. And so, this distinction matters, especially in a report like this, right, where you're drawing conclusions. So I can understand how supervisors would have said, like, well, that's not very accurate, right? We can't say that it is Christine. Did you see Christine? No, your report is wrong. Maybe you should review it, right? Christine's device, we can concede. Christine herself, that's not definitive. We can't draw that conclusion, right? Just because her phone was used does not automatically mean Christine herself was the one using it. Someone else could have been holding that phone, which is the whole reason why we're here. We're here on that whole theory, okay? So because of that issue, or what seemed to be like because of that issue, Bruce had played some role in having Detective Miller no longer perform digital forensics for that unit. He said he retained him as a detective in that unit, but he would no longer be performing digital forensic analysis for him in that unit. Defense loves this, right? John Carroll's probably doing a little very slow victory lap in his head, right? Like, see, when Detective Brendan Miller went and changed his report to reflect what his supervisors wanted it to say, that it was Christine's device and not Christine herself, which is what his report said, that it was Christine. They transferred him out. They got rid of him. He didn't agree. We don't want to hear it. That's what John Carroll's probably saying in his head, but again, very slowly. And he probably stutters a lot when he says it. But Bruce identified a problem with how Miller presented his conclusion of the evidence, not with the evidence itself. Again, we've already established over and over and over, because John Carroll's asked it 7,000 million times. The data itself does not change. We get that. Yes, the data is the same. Christine's device. We get that. Data extraction was correct. We get it. Everyone agrees, John. The zeros and ones. Okay, we get it. All of that was accurate. The issue was with how Miller interpreted or described that data in his report. Again, the summary, Detective Brendan Miller's summary was never changed, but their conclusions changed after Juliana gave them what really happened, allegedly. But then there was some interesting stuff brought up, and a little weird, to raise a little bit of a brow, right? So on July 10th, 2025, Detective Bruce testified at Brendan's preliminary hearing. On July 11th, 2025, Detective Bruce files his paperwork to retire the very next day. And then 2 weeks later, Detective Bruce officially retires, right? So he testifies on July 10th, files for retirement the next day, and then is fully retired 2 weeks later. And maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe he had been planning to retire, though John Carroll said that at a hearing back in February, he was talking about how he was moving to an admin position. He was very excited about that, whatever, but then retired just a few months later. So what happened between February and that hearing in July? I don't know. Is it my business? I don't know. Does it speak to anything regarding this case? I don't know. That would be pure speculation. If you guys have any to offer, happy to hear it, as always. Anyway, but regardless of the suspicious timing, I still feel like Bruce's testimony still didn't help the defense much at all. Because what he's actually saying is that the department identified an issue, they dealt with it, and that, again, the data that was extracted and analyzed will not change, but with context, such as Juliana's confession, is going to change the way that that data is interpreted. All right. Next, we have Lieutenant David Giacchio, okay? I feel like when Giacchio was on the stand, John Carroll didn't just fumble. I feel like he just face planted. Again, just my opinion. Lieutenant Giaggio took over as the homicide supervisor at some point. He was present during Juliana's proffer in October of 2024, which is, again, when she sat down and like told prosecutors everything. I think defense wants to use Giaggio as a way to show, again, that investigators and supervisors had like tunnel vision on this catfish theory, and that they were celebrating being right about, following the evidence objectively. But anyway, at first, it almost looked like defense maybe would get somewhere. First, I was like, okay, my ears were perked. I was paying attention. Antennas were up. I was like, okay. They start introducing these text messages between Lieutenant Giaggio and other investigators and like Patrick Bruce, the one who was on the stand right before Giaggio, where they're like celebrating Juliana's proffer, saying things like, yeah, we were right. Does it make them look like assholes a little bit, like the way they're talking and stuff? Maybe. Yeah, sure. But it also just makes it look like they like had a hunch. They talked about the hunch that they had and it ended up being right about it. I mean, that happens, right? Good detectives, good investigators, good police officers, don't they like some people have that like something's off. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I've got a feeling that maybe this is happening. And it's not tunnel vision, but it's like keeping your mind open to that possibility and seeing where the evidence leads you. Could that be what happened here? I think so. Do I think these guys are a little bit slimy? Yes, also yes, but I mean, they were right, allegedly. Anyway, defense asked Giaggio, oh, okay, so what had you so convinced, so early on in the investigation? And Giaggio was like, actually, it was the soundproof windows. Juliana's the one that dropped that bomb on us. We didn't even know about the soundproof windows. She's the one who brought it up, as it being part of their plan. And we had no idea that had happened. And it was only when she told us that we were able to go back and find, the quotes for these windows, the person who came and installed them, all that. Like, we didn't even know about the windows. So we didn't force feed her that. We didn't even know about it. And so if Juliana is just parroting and like regurgitating what police or attorneys or prosecutors or whatever supposedly fed her, like defense is insisting she did, where did the windows come from? They didn't even know about it, but it was corroborated after she said it, right? They couldn't have told her to say it. They didn't know about it. I feel like there's no way she would have brought up the windows unless it was in fact a part of the plan, unless she was there, unless she, was actively involved in this. So then they keep going with Lieutenant Giaggio and they ask him, okay, so what other early evidence supported that catfish theory? And Lieutenant Giaggio was like, hey, how about the fact that Christina had absolutely no history of visiting sites like this, like going way back? That didn't fly well. John Carroll tried to change the subject, like tried to move on from it really quickly, but I'm pretty sure that was picked up on, right? She had no history of doing this before. How all of a sudden is now she like into all this stuff? Would that stuff not have been, something we would have found somewhere in that digital evidence going backwards? Is that something you just develop overnight and then overnight you're like, yes, come to my house and do this? I feel like that would be something you would have a history of exploring, before you were just all of a sudden ready to do something to that extreme in this role play scenario. It's just like the defense wants the jury to believe that Christine created this FetLife account herself and then all of a sudden just engaged in this extreme sexual behavior, that she like invited this stranger into her home out of nowhere. All of a sudden, this is what I want. I don't know. I feel like people don't just wake up one day and completely reverse their entire behavioral pattern with like no buildup, right? No curiosity, like no history. That just doesn't seem plausible to me. Again, not an expert, not a psychologist, none of that. It's just me. It it doesn't sound right. What sounds more likely to me is that someone else used Christine's devices and did this. That's more plausible, but it's also just alleged. So then, okay, still talking about these celebratory text messages, and these we actually do get visuals of, okay? Finally, we get to look at something. There's one that says, quote, "The only thing we've gotten wrong is you and I believed Christine died before Joe even got there." Okay, John Carroll, what do you think this is showing us? You think that this is showing us that they were biased and had tunnel vision? I think that it's showing that they got some shit wrong. That in fact, their theory that maybe they were theorizing that Juliana and Brendan killed Christine at home and then invited Joe over so that they could shoot him and plot the whole intruder theory, right? That wasn't right. They were wrong about that. So, like, again, they didn't know exactly what was happening, or the theories that they had once Juliana gave them the real story, allegedly, they were realizing, like, oh, we were actually wrong about this part, and we didn't even know about some of these other parts. So it just doesn't fit the defense's theory. And again, this is defense presenting the case, but I think it's just backfiring big time, because I got the complete opposite message from this evidence than I think John Carroll is expecting us to get from it. What does he think? I'd like to be in his head for, I'd say a day, but that's way too long. A couple minutes is probably long enough. Shouldn't figure everything out that I need to know about how this man's brain is working right now. Again, if Juliana was simply regurgitating a narrative that she had been fed, then would that not have been the story that if that was their theory originally, would that not have been what Juliana said? Would that not be the story that we're going with now? Because it's not. It's not. I don't know. The last witness on the stand was Sally Fayez. She is like the director of victim services for Fairfax County Police Department. She said that at some point she had overheard Christine and Brendan's daughter, Valerie, ask Juliana, like, "Can I call you mommy now?" And Juliana responded to her, "I wish." And then Valerie asked if Juliana would marry her dad now. And Juliana said yes. This is like a traumatized child. We still don't know what she heard or saw. Okay, we know she was in the house. They brought her into it. Keep that in mind, allegedly. And the woman who is admittedly, at this point, involved in the loss of her mother's life is already positioning herself in this little girl's life as like her replacement mom. And that, I don't really know what it lends to defense, again, obviously, but it does break my heart. But I'm not sure why John Carroll called her to the stand. I might, again, be missing something there, but I'm really not sure what this testimony did for the defense. At the end of the day, we have Detective Brendan Miller recalled to the stand. This isn't the last time either. He's back, and the only thing we got was more of the same. Defense starts rehashing the same digital forensics argument, and once again, Brendan Miller confirms the data is correct. Yes, the data is correct. The extraction was done properly. The data itself is correct. End of day 6. Let's see if it gets better. Maybe it'll get better in day 7. What do you think? It does. Day 7, which was yesterday, or whenever you're watching this, I guess, was Friday, January 23rd. For me, it's yesterday. The day started with literally an hour of jury instructions, which Judge Penny actually gave a little snark in the beginning. All of this is outside jury presence, by the way, but I think at one point they both attorneys, right, prosecution and defense, seemed completely unprepared to hand over jury instructions, and Judge Penny was like, hand them over. And I think Jenna Sands at one point was like, "Your Honor, if we could just have a little bit of time," and Judge Penny was like, "No, I told you to have this ready 2 days ago. We're doing this now. I said we were going to do it now. We're doing it now. Like, she was just like, enough of my time has been wasted here. We're not doing anymore. So anyway, they hand them over. Judge Penny starts going through them all, reading them all aloud. Again, outside of jury presence. It's just, going through them. Presumption of innocence, direct versus circumstantial evidence, judging credibility, the self-defense stuff, right? The legal framework that the jury is going to use to determine guilty or not guilty. And then came this moment. If you skipped through jury instructions, you wouldn't have heard it. But I listened to everything, even the boring crap, right? Judge Penny asks the defense attorney, is the defendant going to testify? And the defense said, yes, Your Honor, he is. Judge Penny basically was like, wait, what? Excuse me? And defense confirmed, yes, he will testify. Guys, Brendan Banfield is going to take the stand. I don't know when. It could be weeks because John Carroll can't get through a defense presentation. Look, I thought that as fast as prosecution rested, I thought defense was going to rest in like a couple of days. No, we're still talking to the same people because they keep getting down, coming back, getting down, coming back, getting down, coming back because of the disorganization, the failure to lay foundation. Anyway, I digressed a little bit. Brendan Banfield's going to take the stand. Okay, so it does change the gravity of the trial, especially for the onlookers here. This trial has probably bored us all to death. I mean, look, trials do not happen for our entertainment. They do not. That is not why they exist. That is not why they happen. I'm just looking at it even just, again, jury brain, right? At some point, you do got to know how to spin the yarn, right? You've got to keep your jury interested in what you're saying, locked in with you, right? If you're doing what this trial has done so far, your jury is lost in more ways than one. Lost, confused, and lost, And at some point, I would worry that they would just stop listening because that's what people do. You don't want that to happen, but I would worry that if I'm not telling this, if I'm not giving them my narrative in a way that holds them and keeps them wanting to hear what I'm saying, I'm losing them. I know they're losing me. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. But anyway, again, I digress. Brendan Banfield getting up on that stand as a witness. I mean, we're going to be looking at all of the things. We're going to be looking at his demeanor. We're going to be listening for consistency, how he answers the questions that he's asked, whether or not he seems credible. It's very high risk, high reward putting a defendant on the stand. We all know that, right? Because cross-examination is not going to be a friendly chat. It's going to be intense. And once you open that door, there's no closing it until it's done. So my question for you is, when a defendant testifies, right? I saw this, the only other trial I've ever covered on my channel was Karina Cooper, and she took the stand in her own defense, and it was a fucking disaster, in my opinion. When a defendant testifies, how do you read that? Do you see it as yes, good idea, you need to do this? Or do you see this as oh my God, this is going to be a disaster and this is a terrible idea? What do you think? Or is it case by case? You know what I mean? And if so, what do you think in this case? All right, let's move on. So Detective Miller was briefly called back to the stand. This man gets on the stand more than I go to Target for just one thing. Again, I mean, I know it was a continuation from the day before, but Jesus. Anyway, he got on the stand it was something about him identifying the portable case files for Christine Banfield's laptop, Christine Banfield's phone, Juliana Magalhaes' phone, and Brendan Banfield's phone. And then at that point, once he said yes, that's what these are, they could be admitted into evidence. And he came down. Shouldn't that have been done the first time? I don't know anything about trial prep or what should be done in what order, but I feel like that could have been. Anyway, okay, John. Anyway, so then they call Harry Linsky back to the stand for his main testimony. And I think this is where defense is really trying to put the pin in this, right? They're trying to build out that The digital timeline proves that the catfishing didn't happen. And Harry Linsky did actually say that his conclusion after examining all of this evidence was that catfishing was not the case here. That was his conclusion. Look, this man was on the stand for the entire day. He got on like 6 hours. He came off long enough for a witness to testify very briefly and then come off again because foundation hadn't been laid. And John Carroll was unprepared and didn't have what he needed in order to correctly lay that foundation. And so that witness was then subject to recall again. And then Harry Linsky got back on the stand to finish. Anyway, look, he says, I'm going to take all of this messiness, essentially, and I'm going to make it feel like a very clean timeline that points you away from this entire catfishing theory. Linsky walked for 6 hours, slide by slide by slide by slide, of a bunch of different timestamps of Christine's laptop logins, Christine's cell phone logins, FetLife logins, Telegram logins, Telegram conversations, Juliana's location, Brenda's location, what Christine's laptop was doing 2 minutes before the FetLife login, what Christine's laptop was doing 72 and a half seconds after Christine's FetLife login, what Linsky got on the stand to say. Everything is not as it seems. There are places where Christine's laptop was in use on these accounts when Juliana and Brendan were away from the home. Commonwealth even stands up at one point, makes an objection and says he's mischaracterizing this. He's saying she was away when this started, but he just testified that she had actually arrived home, 2 minutes before this started. So she was, I don't know. Look, again, I got lost. There were so many. And we're talking about slide by slide of nothing interesting, though it was a visual aid. It was literally just like little blocks of timestamps, like that would say like Windows 64 login on this model computer at this time, whatever. And then like little Google Maps that he made showing locate. I don't know. The spirit of what he was saying was Juliana and Brendan were not always around when this happened, right? So timing. And he was saying like continuity of activity would lead me to conclude that Christine was the one operating these devices because she was doing normal everyday stuff. And then 2 minutes later, she was doing FetLife stuff. But then he also agreed that some of those were done on the laptop. Some of those were done on the cell phone. And so I have to argue, and this is just my opinion, but I would think like these things can be done simultaneously with two different people operating these devices. I know this because I have kids. And I know my iPad is logged into my Apple ID, but I can be on my MacBook searching for something. And then the next time I go to the Google search bar, the history of the Google search has changed because one of my children is searching for something else on the iPad. Like these things can happen simultaneously on two different devices. Was Christine upstairs on her cell phone doing her normal everyday stuff while Juliana and Brendan were downstairs on the laptop doing all this suspicious and suspected stuff, right? Is it possible? Yes. Is it possible that it wasn't that? Also, yes, but defense has got this guy on the stand saying, look, this proves it, but it doesn't prove it, okay? To me, in my opinion, that doesn't like convince me. That's not like a hardball, like, oh, absolutely this. Now I have to look at this and say, this has to be the way this happened. Because it didn't do that for me. There are other scenarios in which that kind of digital trail could be created. Am I crazy? Maybe. I don't know. So, like, I think another thing that really irritated me that he said was he testified that a person could not be logged in, a user or a device cannot be logged into two different Gmail accounts at the same time, right? Because one is Christine, the one Gmail we talk about on day 7 a lot is Christine's known Gmail account. And then the other Gmail account is like the alleged catfished Gmail account, which is like CBRN something at gmail.com. That's the one that was linked to the FetLife and the Telegram account, right? For the other activity. And he's like, well, you can't be logged into two Gmail accounts on the same device, right? So the user would have had to log out of one and log back into the other. That's false. That's not true. I can open my MacBook right now. I have one tab on my TIFF Unraveled Gmail account, and I have one tab on my personal Gmail account. And I'm logged into both at the same time. I can refresh and read both at the same time. So that right there made me look at him like, okay, expert. Now I just don't really believe you know what you're talking about, because that's basic. I know that. And okay, but continue, I guess. So anyway, 6 hours was literally the gist of what I just told you. He was taking time at stamps on one device, on other devices. Juliana, Brendan, it was a bunch of that. Slide by slide by slide by slide by slide. At the end of the day, that just didn't prove anything to me. Did it prove something to the jury? Or did it give a jury reasonable doubt? That is to be determined. That is up to them to decide. So that's when we called this guy, Nick Barrero, to testify. He was remote. He's in like another state. I think he was in like Tennessee. He testified that he received 2 files. One was the 911 recording, of which his job was to examine 1.5 seconds of that entire call. And he also received another file called Lily 3 Original, which were the sounds of a dog, like barking and whining. And the 1.5 seconds of the entire 911 call that he has been called to testify about, his whole reason for being hired by the defense was to examine 1.5 seconds of a 911 call that sounded like a groan, and where he's meant to compare that with the file of the dog. I don't know the relevance. I don't even know how that would tie into something that is relevant. But we also couldn't find out, because again, John Carroll, completely unorganized, unprepared, was unable to provide documents that laid foundation. Because again, no foundation. I'm lost. I have no idea. What are we talking about? And Commonwealth said the same thing, like, foundation. John Carroll was like, oh yeah, I actually don't have that. So never mind. And you're subject to recall, which again is a pattern for John Carroll. If you're ever a witness that John Carroll has his eyes on to testify, please just know you are always subject to recall, and you'll be recalled. Anyway, defense couldn't continue with that testimony again because foundation wasn't there. So Linsky, I don't know. You'll never guess. He gets recalled to the stand. Okay. And guess what happened? In the last part of the day, in the last part of his questioning for the day, John Carroll is asking him questions, and Commonwealth is constantly objecting, right? Missing documents, foundation, truncated data, incomplete spreadsheets, missing, like all of this stuff is missing, right? And this is where Judge Penny finally has had enough. Okay? She lives in the same town I do, and she's getting ready for a big old blizzard, and she's got stuff to do. And at this point, she's done with John Carroll wasting her time. Okay? And she looks at him and she says, Mr. Carroll, do you have any evidence you can go forward on today without other supporting documents? She says, we're just spinning our wheels right now because we're going to have to go back to all of this again when you get your shit together. Defense was like, oh, well, if I could just have a minute. And she's like, so let me get this straight. You don't have any other questions that you can ask right now that will not have foundation issues. You're just identifying these things, knowing they're going to have foundational issues, and knowing we're going to have to return to them at a later time. No. So a few items did get admitted from that point, but finally Judge Penny calls it and she's like, guys, jury, thank you for being here. Go home, stay safe. I don't know if we'll have court next week. If the county's closed, we're closed. Other than that, we'll let you know. Okay? Have a good night. Thank you for being here. Then she looks at John Carroll outside jury presence. Jury has been dismissed. And I love this lady for saying everything that we have all been screaming, either internally or very out loud, in my case, even at work sometimes. She said, Mr. Carroll, I need you to use this time, this extra time, to reboot and get more organized. She said, and I quote, the wheels are coming off here. I do not want to waste the jury's time anymore. I don't want to waste witnesses' time anymore. And for that matter, I don't want to waste my time anymore. She reminded John Carroll that he is responsible for his record keeping, his exhibit numbers. I wish somebody would make an edit of every single time John Carroll mislabeled his exhibit numbers and Judge Penny had to step in and be like, no, John, we already have that one. You must mean this. And be like, oh, sorry, Judge. And literally 2 seconds later, when evidence is admitted in succession, it would be the next number than the one he just said, and he would still get it wrong. Or like Judge Penny looks at this man and was like, it is not my job to keep track of your stuff. It is not my clerk's job to keep track of your stuff. She has to stay 2 hours after court every single day just to get your crap in order. Okay? She was like, don't come back here next week with this shit, John Carroll. Don't do it. She didn't say those things. Well, some of those things she said, but the stuff, you can tell the stuff I interpreted and expressed in my own words. But that's what she said. That's what she said. So anyway, that was the end of court day 7. That was the end of Brendan Banfield trial week 2. I thought we'd be done. John Carroll's got us going on forever and ever. In fact, whenever court resumes, Harry Linsky will be back on the stand to finish saying whatever it is he's got to say. How many more slides of timestamps do we have to go through, John Carroll? How many more? Okay. When court resumes after the weather, we'll see how much more we have from defense. But the one thing that we do have from defense that I think we will all be looking forward to is the testimony of Brendan Banfield. Okay. That will probably be their last witness, although I can never speak to what John Carroll is thinking. So I would think it would be their last witness, Brendan, but who knows? And then after that, of course, we would have any of like the Commonwealth's rebuttals, that kind of thing. And then we would have some closing arguments and then jury deliberation. I'm really hoping next week this gets to the jury. But yeah, as always, the trial is available fully all days, streaming on, of course, Court TV. I watch on Courtroom Confidential, and some of our favorite creators are streaming the trial with commentary. If you like the commentary, if you like the raw, uncut, unedited, you know where to find those too. It's crazy because the case itself is so complicated, and I feel like there's a lot of layers to it, but it's just been so hard to follow in this courtroom. It really has. But we'll keep following it because we owe it to Christine Banfield, to Joseph Ryan, to see this thing through. They deserve justice in this case, and we will get there. The wheels of justice, they turn slowly sometimes, but they do turn steady. Again, thank you guys so much for being here, for being part of my community, part of the Tip Unraveled family, and I will see you guys tomorrow. I'm going to break up a lot of this. I'm going to break up the heaviness. I've been covering the trial for 2 weeks. You've been covering the trial for 2 weeks. It's heavy. It's heavy. It's dry. It's a lot. I'm going to break that up a little bit tomorrow with, I think a true crime FaceTime is in order. We need to lighten it up around here just a little bit. So I'm going to give that to you. I hope you'll join me for that. Answer that call. Don't send me to voicemail. Until then, please stay safe. Keep asking questions and keep unraveling. Love you.